How we survived. I want to tell you, I just can't put down this book, this Prime Minsters by Avner. And I want to just read you, it's so filled with amazing and beautiful and powerful and poignant stories from modern Jewish history. And of course, representing ancient Jewish history. So I want to take you back to the 73 war when the Jews were in the synagogue on Yom Kippur in Israel. And the leadership of Israel, including all the security, had said that there was no imminent threat. And there was a surprise attack by Egypt and Syria. Overwhelming numbers of tanks and aircraft and soldiers fighting thinly defended lines, both in the Sinai against Egypt and the Golan against Syria. I remember worrying the first few days. It looked like Israel was going to lose. And in the book, he tells the story of Golda Meir going to visit the soldiers on the Golan. And it was on Sukkot, which was, of course, starts 5 days after Yom Kippur. And she went into a sukkah the soldiers had erected, 14 of them, and they were saying the prayers for the four species, Lulav and Etrog, as their tanks were being refilled. And it says here, straightening her skirt, Golda Meir asked the men about their families, her countenance that of a concerned grandmother. She learned she was talking to lawyers and bakers, teachers, falafel vendors, shopkeepers, and executives. And then she said, now is there anyone who would like to ask me something? One tank crew member, seemed to be in his 20s, raised his hand, caked in mud from head to toe and dust. I have a question, he said, his voice throaty with exhaustion. My father was killed in the War of 48 and we won. My uncle was killed in the War of 56 and we won. My brother lost an arm in 67 and we won. Last week I lost my best friend over there, pointing to the Vale of Tears. And we're going to win, but is all the sacrifice worthwhile, Golda? What's the use of our sacrifice if we can't win the peace? Talking to the Prime Minister of Israel, called her Golda, like unbelievable. That's Israel. An edgy murmur passed through the group of unshaven, weary, and unkempt soldiers. The Prime Minister returned the young soldier a long and sad look. A strange reserve in her eyes, a remote stare as though she was looking way inside herself. For on this Sukkot day, this indefatigable and implacable old woman representing the very essence of Jewish self-defense. She was the fervent agent of the view that it was infinitely preferable to deal with power's confounding implications than to be powerless again. So she answered in a deeply compassionate tone. I weep for your loss, just as I grieve for all our dead. I lay awake at night thinking of them, and I must tell you in honesty, we are our sacrifices for ourselves alone. Then perhaps you would be right. I'm not at all sure they would be worthwhile. But if our sacrifices are for the sake of the whole Jewish people, and I believe with all my heart that any price is worthwhile. A faintly bemused smile tipped the corners of her mouth, and though her face was gnarled with age, a girl looked out of her eyes as she said, let me tell you a story. In 1948, in the season of the year, I arrived in Moscow as Israel's first ambassador to the Soviet Union. The state of Israel was brand new, Stalinism was at its height, Jews had no rights. They had been cut off from their fellow Jews for 30 years since the Communist Revolution of 1917. Stalin had proclaimed war against Judaism. He declared Zionism a crime. Hebrew was banned, Torah study banned. One was sent to the Gulag or to Siberia for far less. The first Shabbat after I had presented my credentials, my embassy staff joined me for services at the Moscow Great Synagogue. It was practically empty. The news of our arrival in Moscow spread quickly so that when we came a second time, the street in front of the synagogue was jam-packed. Close to 50,000 people were waiting for us. Old people and teenagers, babies in parents' arms, even men in officers' uniforms of the rest of our army. Despite all the risks, despite all the official threats to stay away, these Jews had come to demonstrate their kinship with us. Inside the synagogue, the demonstration was the same. Without speeches or parades, these Jews were showing their love for Israel and the Jewish people, and I was their symbol. I was in Israel at the Great Synagogue in Moscow in the summer of '73, right before I went to Israel with my youth group, and then got home in August, and then 2 months later was this '73 war. I think that little story helps us understand how Jews have survived and why.